Let me see. Okay, so.
Oh, you've started the session.
Oops, I'm sorry. Did I do something wrong?
Should we?
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we're live actually.
Are we live now? Oh goodness. Shall I turn it off or shall I?
No, I think since we pressed the button, you've got 127 people already joined. So
Right.
I'm gonna wish you well, and
Okay.
in a moment you'll be wanting to say hello to your attendees. So
Thank you. All right.
good luck.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. Bye then. Right.
We just wait a few seconds for
Yeah.
everyone to join. And
hello, everybody. Yeah. So I'll just wait for a while. I'm just going to. Okay. Sorry, my mistake. Well, it's 1 minute before we start anyway. So yeah. So, hello.
All right. Yeah, we'll just wait for everybody to come in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. So we've got Brian coming all the way from Malaysia today, and I am currently based in Surrey. But it looks like we've got people from all over.
Hello. Yeah. Guten Morgen. Yeah. Guten Abend. Ni hao. Namaste. Hello from London. Okay. Greetings. Lei ho. Lei ho. Hello. Hola. Ni hao. Bonjour. Bonsoir. Yeah. I'm in Penang.
Well, is that Serbian, I think?
I think that was Serbian and Russian, I think, before that.
All right.
People are coming in. Yeah. Messages are piling up. Wow. Okay. So I'm just going to turn a little bit, show you where I am now. Привет.
Okay, I think we've hit 1:30.
Right.
Should we get started? So, yeah, welcome to the Language Show Live, and thank you so much for joining us today from all over the world. We're delighted to have you with us. And if you've ever wondered about what chocolate actually means or the origins of the word chili, then you've definitely come to the right talk. Don't expect us to unpack the origins of chili chocolate though, because I, for one, have not been able to figure that out yet. But first, before we kick off, let's introduce ourselves properly. So my name is Emily, and I'm the Languages Manager at language learning company uTalk. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Brian, who, as you may have already gathered, is joining us from Malaysia. So I will now hand over to Brian for the first part of the talk. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I apologize for the background. I'm actually in a very, very old sports club in Malaysia, and we're preparing for Diwali holiday tomorrow. Yeah, so I've had internet problems at my house, and we're out of electricity for a few hours. So I'm here for now, and yeah, live from Penang, from Georgetown, Malaysia. Okay, right. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me as I figure out how to use this. Yes, Diwali is like, okay, right. So share sound, and there we go. Right. Okay. Perfect. All right. Can you see my screen, Emily? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will start with this. Okay, so the talk is called Unlocking the Hidden Meanings of Everyday Words. All right, and of course we are from uTalk. Emily will, towards the end, she will talk a bit about uTalk and explain exactly what we do. In the meantime, let's take a look at this map. Okay, so if we think about languages, okay, languages are always in a state of flux. Okay, they're always evolving, borrowing words from other languages and all that. And among the oldest group of languages, the oldest language that we're in contact are actually these languages here in Southeast Asia. So India, if you can see my cursor going from India to Malaysia, the Philippines, a bit of southern Thailand, and yeah, this whole area. So this is called actually the spice route. So from probably 1,500 years before Christ. That's 1,500 BC. People in this area have already been in contact with each other. So you have spices going in from Asia, Southeast Asia to India, India to Middle East, and Middle East into Europe. Right. And from here, what we can see is languages always like to borrow from one another. When people are in contact, when you have people who are trading with one another, they borrow words, and not just words, but also concepts like writing, religion, for example. And if we look at, for example, Hinduism, so the spice trade that's been established between Southeast Asia and India and Sri Lanka have been around for, 1,500 years before Christ, at least, as far as we know. Now, so what happens when people trade with each other? So they buy, they exchange commodities. They also exchange words. So, for example, the Indian languages, for example, Sanskrit and Tamil, have highly influenced the languages of Southeast Asia. All right, let's take a look. And not only that, but loan words, for example, are spread from one another by trade and commerce. So look at the words like tea, coffee, the names of spices in English, all come from somewhere else. Okay, the word for tea comes from China, from Chinese. Coffee comes from Arabic, but it actually comes from one of the Ethiopian languages, for example. The word for silk is from Chinese, okay? And when there is trade between different linguistic communities, there'll often be a sort of a lingua franca between them. So if we have Malay in Southeast Asia, we have Persian or Farsi in Central Asia, and Greek in the Mediterranean and Asia Minor, and recently Swahili in East Africa. And what happens is these lingua franca become so influential that they tend to borrow, they tend to donate vocabulary to the various borrowing languages. So for example, in the Philippines, the Tagalog language, for example, and Cebuano, for example, they have words for thank you, which come from Arabic, salamat, which came via Malay, all right? And not only that, but this word was brought actually by Arab merchants, Arabian merchants. Apologize for background noise, I'm sorry. Arabian merchants in search of spices, which were a major commodity in the Middle East and in Europe in the Middle Ages. If you've ever seen, okay, sorry, I'm actually going a bit ahead of myself. If you've ever seen a cookbook from the Middle Ages, there's a lot of spices they would use that you do not find in modern European cooking. For example, galangal and large amounts of ginger, which you don't in a recipe from, say, northern Spain, for example. Okay, so now let's talk about word borrowing and the opposite of word borrowing. So, for example, the word for turkey is a very, very, very good counterexample. You've got the word, this animal that's been introduced to different parts of the world, but nobody seems to know where it comes from. So you have the turkey in England, but Turkish people call it hindi, which means Indian, as do the French who call it dinde, from coq dinde, which is the Indian rooster. And of course, you have the Dutch and Scandinavians who say something like kalkoen, kalkun, all of which comes from a town in South India. And the Portuguese call it peru, which is a bit unusual. The Arabs call it dikurumi, which is the Roman chicken, or dajaj rumi. And in Malaysia, we call it the ayam belanda, the Dutch chicken. While in India, people call it, if you speak Hindi, it's turkey. And very interesting enough, in the south of India, they call it barn pori, which means the sky chicken. So there's an example of words that have been that have not been borrowed, but the animal or the object has been introduced over the world. All right. So one more thing we look at is vocabularies can be shared by a borrowing or semantic shift. So an example of this is, of course, chocolate, which comes from nawat. Emily's going to explain a bit more about it later on, the origins of the word chocolate and how it evolves in the various languages. Okay, and Mandarin we say chao ke li. Okay, chocolat in Vietnamese also come from this long history of borrowing and adapting words and their phonologies to suit the borrowing languages. Okay, so right. So this is another interesting thing. It's called semantic shift. When words are borrowed from one language to another, oftentimes the words retain the meaning and the original sense, but very, very often as well, the meanings tend to shift slightly. So for example, the word turkey used to refer to the guinea fowl, which is a different bird altogether, right? The word for corn was the Old English word for grain. So oats were called, corn in Scotland and Ireland. And the 18th century explorers wrote that rice was the only corn that grows on Java. So corn, it basically was any kind of grain. But when corn was brought in from the United States, from North America, it became so common that the word, corn replaced it. What we call maize, actually, is the original word. Okay. I do apologize for the background noises. And then, right. So we're all very familiar with the European languages, and they form part of a very, very large family extending all the way into, South Asia. So India, Iran, okay. Kurdish belongs to the Indo-Aryan family, Indo-European family, the Indo-Aryan branch of the Indo-European family, might add, and all these languages. Now, if we look at a very, very common word, like the English word timber, which is actually related to German Zimmer, and these two words, it's rather strange because English timber refers to the materials used to build a house or a room. In German, Zimmer means the room itself, but they come from the same origins. They come from the root dem or dom, that means to build. So you have the word domus in Latin. So domus is a house, something which is built. A dominus is the lord of the house. Domina is the lady of the house. A domesticus is the person, the servants of the house, for example. You have the word Dhamma in Sanskrit, and Dampati, meaning the lord of the house. And you have the word, I think in Slavic you say dom or domov as well, I think. So it's an example of a word that has been passed by, not by borrowing, but by inheritance, by shared genetic origins. Okay. Example. Now, this is the contrary to this case is the word, for example, polis or pura in Sanskrit, which means city or town or fortress. And this word was borrowed very, very, very actively in various languages. So, for example, Sanskrit pura is the source of the word Singapura, which means lion city in Singapore, right? Singapore. And this shares the same root as Singburi, which is a city in Thailand called Lion City as well. So Buri, Pura, Por, any Indian city with the name Por at the back, Pura, that's all related to the word polis, as in metropolis in Greek, okay? All right, a very, very clear example of semantic shift. So in English, the word town refers to, a town. But in German, the exact same word, of course, sharing the exact same origins, is Zaun, which means fence. And the Dutch word is Tuin, which means garden or yard. And what happens is, what we see here is that the original Proto-Germanic word Tun or Tunna, which means a fence or enclosure, became extended. So German retained the original meaning, right, which is fence. English used to refer to the thing which is within an enclosure, town. And Dutch as well, even more specialized, a garden, because a lot of gardens have, I guess, fences or barriers to keep out, invaders and keep out thieves and pests, right? So here we go. So this is the origins of the word town. Okay, town, doin. Okay. What else? Okay, so I'm going to go very quickly. Unfortunately, my internet is slowly fizzing out, but so. Globalization brings more and more vocabulary items from dominant languages. So the question is, what does this mean? Since human languages are always borrowing from one another, and due to things like the internet, social media, mass media, more and more languages are borrowing so much from one another. Like for example, modern day English is so rich and so full of words from other languages. Will linguistic variety diminish in the future? Will languages become more and more alike? For example, in Thailand, I hear people say the word use upload, Wi-Fi, TV all the time, right? Does that mean that languages will slowly lose out on their individuality and become more and more uniform across the world? Yeah, that's a question, I'm putting to the floor. Will different languages gradually develop and sort of umbrella super vocabulary that can be understood universally? For example, the words Wi-Fi, internet, social media, app, iPhone, Facebook, all these things. Do we consider them, do these languages eventually become so alike that, they lose their individuality, okay? But the thing is, again, if we look at it, okay, this is not a new phenomenon. If you look at, for example, languages with large Muslim populations, languages that have had contact with Arabic, for example, they borrow a lot of vocabulary. Among them, the words for hello. In Swahili, you say habari gani, which is like, what's the news, right? How are you? And in Indonesia, you say apa kabar. In Malaysia as well, kya khabar in Urdu, okay? Che khabar in Persian, ne haber in Turkish, right? So these all the meaning of like what's the news, and these words have been in use for so long that they've become part of the you know the normal language of these local languages. So the thing is, okay, the question is, okay, at which point does a language become so influenced by others that it loses its individuality? I see now. Okay, so I'm done for now. I'm going to hand over to Emily, who will continue from here. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for those insights, Brian. That was fascinating. And I think from that, we can all agree that it's true that no matter what language you speak, you can find lexical similarities, even in everyday language, as we've already seen a few terms presented by Brian, things like food, animals, objects, and even in how we greet each other, this example that Brian just shared with us. So I'm going to unpack a little more about this now during our second part. So without further ado, I am going to kick us off with something that many people start off learning when they know that they're traveling to a new place and they want to pick up a bit of their local language, and this is food. So I want you to cast your mind back to the last time that you travelled to a new country where they speak a language that is not your first language. It was probably quite a long time ago, I imagine. But can you remember if there were some items of food on the menu perhaps where you went out for dinner that actually you recognised? Maybe you're thinking right now something along the lines of burger or chips or pizza, which seem to be quite universal words. Yeah, I think Brian's given us a few clues as to why that is already. But yeah, since we're kind of focusing on everyday words, I want us to think a bit about food now. And one of the foods that I want us to think about is chocolate, which is estimated to be consumed by around 1 billion people every day. So this, I think we can all agree, is a very popular everyday food. But do you know where chocolate originally comes from? That's right, South America. So here we can see the original word for chocolate in the Nahuatl language. Now, is it just me, or does this look quite similar to the English word? And we can definitely see a lot of similarities with this original word in Nahuatl, actually across many, many languages all over the world. And I've given you a snapshot here on this slide. So it does rather look like it's been borrowed from this original Nahuatl word. For example, we can clearly see their commencement, their ch sound in many of these languages. We've got Malay, Icelandic, Dari, to name just a few. And then many of these languages also have this kind of kol morpheme in them, and this is widely believed to be related to the original word for cocoa. Yeah, let's break this down and see it in a bit more detail. So according to another source, the Royal Spanish Academy, or RAI, as it is known in Spanish, the start of this word, zocol, this supposedly meant sour or bitter, which I think we can all agree makes a lot of sense because this is the taste of the raw cocoa beans that chocolate is made from. And then we also have this suffix atl at the end of the word. And this actually means water in the original Nahuatl word. And this original chocolate that's exactly what it would have looked like in Mexico all those hundreds of years ago. It would have been a mixture of water and cocoa beans. So rather different to the chocolate that we know and love today. But still the linguistic legacy from Nahuatl and the language of the Aztecs does live on. Let's jump back to our previous slide. So we saw that this word has been adopted into a great many languages, not only European ones, but all over Asian, Middle Eastern languages. Some examples we've got, I'm going to pronounce these a lot worse than Brian did. So Thai, we've got chocolate, chokoli in Korean, chocolate in Punjabi. So what is the significance of Nahuatl and why did it end up exerting such a huge influence the world over? Well, we just need to look back and delve back into history. So we know that Nahuatl was the main language of the Aztecs of Central America in the 15th century, at the point when the Spanish invaded Mexico, actually. So Nahuatl is still spoken by about 1.7 million people today in Mexico. So it's a language that is very much alive and well. But yes, in the 15th century, the Spanish explorers who explored what they called the New World, while they tried a lot of things that they found, and chocolate was one of those things, which naturally they loved and they brought back to Europe with them. So yes, we have a lot to thank those Aztecs for. So as you can imagine, globalization and trade has had a huge influence on etymology the world over. Brian revealed a bit to us about that already. And chocolate is by no means the only thing that we benefited from the New World. I'll show you another word from Nahuatl. This word. Pretty sure you can guess what that means in your native language. And there's a good reason for that. So here on the slide, we get a good feel for how far-reaching this plant has become. It's made its way into a great many different languages all around the world as well. So again, we can see some common features across these words. In particular, the start, this ch sound, followed by the kind of il sound. For me, the most surprising revelation was how it made its way into such widespread areas, from the Malagasy of Madagascar, all the way even to the Sami languages of Norway, and from there to Tagalog in the Philippines, so many. And for me, it's quite funny because we know that in Asia, they love their spicy food. I think Brian can attest to that in Malaysia and his travels around Asia. So I always assumed that that's actually where the chili plant and the word chili came from, but it's not actually. It's, as we've just seen, it's from the Nahuatl language of Mexico. So like chocolate, we can break this word down into its constituent parts. You can learn a bit about Nahuatl grammar along the way when we do this. Great, so chil in Nahuatl, this first part of the word, refers to the fruit. Yes, chilies are a fruit, not a herb or a vegetable. It's their official classification. And then we're ending this word with the suffix li. So suffixes in Nahuatl give information about the character of the preceding word. So they tell us, for example, if it's an object or a person or an action, etc. So li in this case actually means the object, which is a chili. Amazing. Okay, I promised that this talk, the second part of the talk, will not all be about food, but I just wanted to share one more with you, which is another very much everyday word, at least in Europe and in particular the UK. Very, very staple food, the potato. Also originally came from the Americas. So the Taino people of the Caribbean called this root vegetable batata. And the potato plant was originally taken from Europe, again in the 15th century. It was taken from the Caribbean and the Americas to Europe in the 15th century. And actually the Romans, they decided to call it Poma terrestrial. And we can see that some variants of this did actually stick. So for example, we've got pomme de terre in French. But contrary to that, there are a great many translations the world over where we can see this root, this Taino root still from Europe to Asia and beyond. We'll just have a look at a few examples. So we have batata in Sorani, batala in Sinhala, potato in Fijian, and batata in Gujarati, just to name a few. So it's not difficult to see the connections here. And I think it's interesting to see which languages favour this plosive P sound in place of the B sound, depending on the phonology of the language. Great. So whilst we're thinking a bit about explorers and traders, and I know there are a great many horror stories of the interactions that they had and the things that they did where they went, I think it is worth pondering what their attempts at communication looked like at the time, because I believe that this has also had a great impact on the lexicon that we use, that all of us use each and every day, no matter where we're from. So an amusing example of communication is the story of how the llama got its name. Okay, so the story goes that supposedly when Spanish explorers landed on Peruvian soil, they encountered this curious creature. Naturally, they wanted to know more. So they asked their Quechua locals, the Quechua speaking locals in Spanish, what are they called? ¿Cómo se llama? And they repeated themselves so many times in an attempt to be understood by the locals that they simply repeated back what they heard, because they didn't have a clue what they were saying in Spanish at the time. So they just repeated this word, llama, llama, which means called in Spanish. And the name stuck. And so we can now attribute this word llama to the Quechua language to this day. We can't be 100% sure if this story is true and if this is indeed how the llama got its name, but we can see that this word has had very far-reaching linguistic influence all over the world, from Shona to Junga. The most curious for me is this one at the bottom here, Lama Kalaok from Burmese. This strays the furthest away, I think, from all the examples that I have on this slide, but we can still very much see the influence of this word in there. We can also see some typical substitutions in there, like in Japanese, we've got the letter R instead of L, and this is just because of the sounds that the Japanese language is familiar with. Yeah, but despite that, it's still clear to see that this has had a really big influence. In fact, there were so many words, so many translations that we found. I did not have enough space to include them all on this slide. Great. So whilst we're still on this subject of intrepid explorers, or conquistadores, or colonizers might be a better word to describe them. Another thing that they would have had to have faced at the time are hurricanes. We know that it's hurricane season at the moment. This is a word that we're hearing a lot during this season. So I think it's no surprise to learn that actually this word does indeed originate from around Central America. And in fact, from the Caribbean specifically. So from this Taino language, This was the indigenous language of the Caribbean before Spanish displaced it, actually, which unfortunately resulted in the extinction of the Taino language. But despite that, we can still see the influence of this word in quite a few, sorry, the influence of this language in quite a few different words, even to this day, even though it is no longer an active language. Okay, so the original word is huracán in Taino. And in Taino, it meant God of the storm. And this was absorbed into the Spanish language at the time. So the K morphed into a C, which is more typical of the Spanish language. And then it's widely accepted that from there, from the Spanish language, it made its way into many, many different languages around the world. Let's see some more examples. All right. Great. Okay, I would like us to return to one final example about food before we move on to Q&A. Yeah, okay, so another very popular everyday food item, especially in the UK, it's quite a trend, avocados. Apparently, according to archaeologists, this has been part of the Mexican diet for over 10,000 years. So we're returning to this Nahuatl language again, which is indigenous to Mexico. Now, this word has another meaning in the Nahuatl language, which I won't share with you now, but you might be interested to look that up for yourself. Maybe someone knows on the chat and can share that. But warning, you won't look at avocados in the same way again. Okay, so I think it's remarkable, again, how many languages have absorbed this word, or at least features of this original Nahuatl word. So here we can see a few examples. Many of the words commence with this ah sound, followed by the oh sound, even in as far-flung places as Somalia and Iran. All right, so we hope that you enjoyed hearing some insights into why it is that we can find clear links between really far-flung languages. We've seen some examples from Icelandic, Indonesian, Mongolian, Maori, and despite the fact that they're worlds apart geographically and culturally, still we can find links and realize that actually we are all interconnected wherever we're from. I think that's fascinating from this shared history. And I think it's, yeah, a really nice reminder that we're all linked, and it also helps us to, learn a bit of new languages when we go abroad, especially food. I think that's a great place to start. So before we move on to Q&A, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about how we put this talk together. It looks like Brian might actually have disappeared off the call, unfortunately. We know that he had a few connectivity issues. But yeah, I will just explain to you a bit about how we put our talk together. Cool. So as I mentioned at the start of the talk, we've looked at in excess of 140 languages during the course of this talk. The majority of these languages we extracted from the uTalk database. This is the content which is actually on an app that we have, an app called uTalk Learn Any Language. If you'd like to find out more, then you're more than welcome to go and download it on Google Play or the App Store. You can also find it here on your computer at utalk.com. So we can be sure that the data that we've seen today is accurate because we've used native speakers and language experts to translate this content for us. If there have been some words that perhaps are not familiar to you, this could be due to dialectal differences. So often we'll go for the kind of version of the language that is most widely understood. But yeah, we can be sure that the data that we've seen today is yeah, based on solid research. All right. So yeah, we also just wanted to let you know that we're a company based in London. We do a lot of work with schools. So if you're a teacher, then we'd be really delighted to hear from you. You can see our contact details here. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, let's move on to some questions. So let me just stop sharing. Okay, so feel free to write any questions in the Q&A section, and I will do my best in the absence of Brian to see if I can give you some answers. Okay, I will, sorry, bear with me as I find some questions. Okay, so someone says, are you going to provide us with these slides? I would be more than happy to do that. If you just email me here, emily@utalk.com. Yeah, I'd be delighted to share them with you. Thank you for asking. Okay, more questions. Gosh, there's so many. It's brilliant. Should start from the top. Oh, okay. Someone raises a really interesting question. She says, when we are taught to teach spelling in English, they strongly emphasize how a lot of the words stem from 3 main languages, Greek, Latin, French, or Anglo-Saxon. This seems to take it a lot further in making it more in-depth. As you mentioned, German and Dutch a lot. This can be quite confusing. How would you suggest we make this clearer to ESL learners? Actually, that's a really tough one. So ESL, English is a second language. I would perhaps kind of flip that and actually use the connections to make it easier to remember. That being said, there are false cognates and false friends, which we have to be aware of, and unfortunately we just have to learn. Yeah, but I think when we make connections between languages, that can be a great way to make that link in your mind and actually retain it more. And it's true that there are kind of clearer, more obvious links between language families, or at least we'll find more words in common there. So yeah, German, Dutch, and English, I think. Yeah. Okay, more questions. Any comment, Brian, on the new English word lockdown? I can't really speak on behalf of Brian. I'm sure he'd be delighted to hear from you, by the way. Please do get in touch with us. You've got our email addresses. Yeah, Brian is just brian@utalk.com. So any questions that would be directed at him, feel free to send him a message. Yeah, I would say that this word probably has been borrowed into a great many languages the world over. We know that English has a huge influence. Whether or not that's a good thing, that's up to you to decide. But yeah, certainly that's one that I think the legacy of which will live on for a long time. Okay, any more questions? Oh, okay, someone asks for more resources on etymology. There's some fantastic resources out there. One that I really recommend is actually called The Etymology Nerd. I think this could be particularly interesting for students. So I know that the person who has this, he has this blog and also this Instagram account. It's absolutely fascinating. There's a wealth of information on there. And it's presented in a really colourful way that I think students would kind of, yeah, would really draw them in. So I recommend that you check that out. I think it's a guy who's based in the States, that one. Okay, more questions. Any books or resources? Do you know what, that is also a great question. Yes, there's tons of information out there. Again, Brian would have been a great person to have answered that. So please feel free to send him a message and ask him for any specific recommendations on that. I saw someone shared the etymology nerd link. That's great. Thank you very much to the person who did that. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Oh, thank you for your kind comments about the talk. That means a lot. Okay, just looking for any more questions I can answer in the few minutes that we have left together. Oh, okay, someone is saying, can you tell us about your own language learning experience? Yes, so I have studied Spanish and French. I also taught English as a foreign language in Spain, which I highly recommend to anybody who would like to really delve into their new language. I think living abroad is a fantastic way to completely immerse yourself if you want to learn really fast, particularly if you really, really want to get to grips with speaking. I think that's one of the hardest skills to get to grips with. And as I've already mentioned, I work for this company called UTalk. That is a company for learning languages. We have an app for learning over 140 languages. And our emphasis is really on speaking. And I have to say that's something that I'm really behind. I think that speaking is kind of the most essential skill, and yet the one that we're the shyest usually to really delve into. So I recommend this. But I think it really depends on what you want to learn for, whether it's for holiday or whether it's kind of something that you really, really want to unpack. If you want to live there, for example, then yeah, there's a whole wealth of resources out there. I think just have to kind of search and see what works best for you. But yeah, don't underestimate the importance of speaking from day one. All right, any more questions? Some people were asking what avocado meant in Nahuatl. It actually meant testicle. Yeah, so this, you can kind of tell maybe why that's how it originated. It still means this today in Nahuatl, and it also means avocado. So yeah, I told you wouldn't see it in the same way again. And there's so many examples of other words where we can see links. Someone brought up the question of pineapple and ananas. So someone is asking where these two different forms came from. I actually don't know the answer to this, but I'm fascinated to find out. So I really encourage you to take this further at the end of this talk and do your own research. Yeah, I imagine that it could be similar to this example where we saw of the potato, where we've got kind of different groups of words that all kind of look similar, but they're almost divided. It could be to do with the language family. I'm just guessing, but there could be a link there. Yeah. Yeah, someone's raised this question with potatoes. So we've got Kartoffel in German, which looks completely different to the example that we saw of Batata. Yeah, I think there's a few other languages, particularly Germanic languages, that follow this pattern, that look similar to Kartoffel. So yeah, I don't know exactly where that originated from, but I know that we can see the influence of that word in a number of languages. It's definitely not unique in that. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions before we wrap up. All right, brilliant. Some people have said that they've emailed me. Fantastic. Yeah, I would really love to hear from you. So any other questions, do feel free to send me an email. If I haven't had the chance to answer your question, please do get in touch. And yeah, it would be great to connect with you. And as I say, if you enjoyed the talk, we'd love you to check out our website, utalk.com. We'd love you to check out our app if you're interested in delving a bit more into some of the languages that we've seen today. You can actually learn any of the languages that we have on there from any of the languages that we have on there. So you don't have to use English at all if you don't want to. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And just really hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. And we'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Bye.